The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mix of translations and heated debate. Representatives from dozens of species filled the curved amphitheater, their various forms creating a tapestry of alien life. At the center podium, Ambassador Keth of the Zephyrian Empire stood with his forearms crossed, his blue-scaled face twisted in obvious frustration. "The motion before us today is simple," Keth announced, his voice carrying through the translation devices worn by every delegate. "The humans have petitioned for full membership in our Galactic Alliance. I stand here to formally object to this ridiculous request." A murmur rippled through the assembly. The human delegation sat in the lowest tier of seats, a position reserved for species under consideration for membership. Ambassador Sarah Chen maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened slightly. Beside her, General Marcus Rodriguez kept his expression neutral, having faced worse diplomatic hostility during his military career. Representative Thix of the insectoid Klaxon Collective clicked his mandibles in agreement. The Zephyrian speaks truth. These mammals have barely left their single star system. What could they possibly contribute to an alliance that spans 3 galaxy arms? Indeed, added Senator Vorth of the Crystalline Nexuary Coalition, her prismatic form reflecting the chamber's lights. Their technology is primitive. Their ships are slow and clunky compared to our vessels. They lack the refinement needed for true galactic citizenship. Ambassador Chen finally stood, requesting permission to speak. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the human representative. "Honored delegates, we understand your concerns about humanity's technological development. We don't claim to match your engineering marvels or your faster-than-light capabilities. But, we offer something different: our perspective, our adaptability, and our determination." A sound that could only be described as laughter echoed from the Zephyrian section. "Determination?" Keth scoffed. "What use is determination when the Void Seekers return? What good is perspective against enemies that consume entire star systems?" The mention of the Void Seekers sent a chill through the chamber. Even species that had been enemies for centuries shared the same fear when that name was spoken. The Void Seekers had last attacked the galaxy 500 years ago, leaving devastation in their wake before mysteriously withdrawing to the dark space between galaxies. General Rodriguez stood slowly, his weathered face bearing the scars of countless battles. "If I may address the council," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "I've spent 40 years in military service to humanity. I've seen what determination can accomplish when everything seems hopeless." "Pretty words from a species that fights with chemical propellants and metal projectiles," Senator Vorth replied coldly. "Your most advanced weapons are barely more sophisticated than what our ancestors used millennia ago." "That's true," Rodriguez admitted, surprising the assembly with his honesty. "Our weapons are simple. Our ships are slower. Our technology lags behind yours by centuries, perhaps millennia. But we've learned to make do with what we have." The chamber erupted in whispers and electronic chatter. Many delegates interpreted his words as an admission of human inadequacy. The Zephyrian delegation seemed particularly pleased with what they saw as a confession of weakness. But, in the upper tiers, in a section reserved for military observers, one figure listened with different ears. General Thrace Corvain of the Ulterian Defense Force sat motionless, his reptilian features unreadable. Unlike the other observers, Corvain wore full military dress, his chest heavy with decorations earned in battles across the galaxy. His green-scaled hand rested on the pommel of an energy blade that had seen more combat than most species had seen peace. Corvain had fought the Void Seekers. He was one of the few beings in the chamber who had faced their dark ships and lived to tell about it. He had watched entire fleets disappear into the hungry darkness that followed the Seekers wherever they went. He had seen planets stripped of all life in a matter of hours. As the debate continued below, Corvain found himself studying the human delegation more carefully. There was something about them that reminded him of the Ulterian warriors he had served with in the deepest, darkest conflicts. They carried themselves with a quiet confidence that spoke of experience rather than arrogance. The humans lacked the basic qualifications for membership, Keth continued his argument. Their fastest ships would take decades to reach the nearest Alliance outpost. They have no energy weapons, no shield technology, no quantum communication networks. They are, in every measurable way, inferior to the least of our current member species. Representative Thix's compound eyes glittered as he added, "Their biology is equally primitive. They require specific atmospheric conditions, narrow temperature ranges, and constant nutritional input. They're fragile creatures unsuited for the rigors of galactic civilization. Ambassador Chen's hands clenched briefly before she forced herself to relax. We acknowledge our physical limitations, she said carefully. But, we believe diversity of thought and approach strengthens any alliance. Our species has overcome significant challenges through innovation and adaptation. What challenges could your sheltered world have faced? Senator Vortha's crystalline form pulsed with amusement. You've never fought a galactic war. You've never faced extinction from outside forces. You know nothing of real struggle. The words hung in the air like a challenge. General Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Ambassador Chen, some silent communication passing between them. Chen nodded almost imperceptibly. You're right, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. We've never fought a galactic war. We've only fought each other. The admission should have weakened their position further, but something in Rodriguez's tone made several delegates lean forward with interest. For most of our recorded history, Rodriguez continued, humanity has been at war with itself. Nation against nation, ideology against ideology, sometimes neighbor against neighbor. We've fought wars that lasted decades, conflicts that claimed millions of lives. We've developed weapons capable of destroying our entire planet and came frighteningly close to using them. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the translation devices seemed to whisper more quietly. We've fought in frozen wastelands where the air itself could kill you. We've battled in deserts where water is more precious than any technology you possess. We've taken war to the bottom of our oceans and to the vacuum of space around our world. We've learned to fight when outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. In the upper tier, General Corvain's scarred hand tightened on his weapon's grip. Something about the human's words resonated with his own experiences. But, more importantly, Rodriguez continued, we've learned when to stop fighting. We've learned to forge alliances with former enemies, to find common ground with those who once sought our destruction. Our greatest achievement isn't our technology or our weapons, it's learning to work together despite our differences. Representative Thix made a dismissive clicking sound. Pretty philosophy, but philosophy doesn't stop quantum disruptors or dark matter weapons. When the real threats come, you'll need more than teamwork and determination. Will we? Rodriguez asked quietly. How did your advanced civilizations fare against the Void Seekers? The question sent a shock through the assembly. The Void Seekers were rarely discussed openly, and never by outsiders. The memory of that conflict was still too painful for many species. The Void Seekers are gone, Keth said quickly, his voice tight. They withdrew 500 years ago and haven't been seen since. They're not relevant to this discussion. Aren't they? Rodriguez pressed. From what I understand, they defeated every major fleet sent against them. Your energy shields failed. Your quantum weapons barely slowed them down. Your fastest ships couldn't escape their dark matter nets. How did the war finally end? No one answered. The chamber had fallen into an uncomfortable silence broken only by the soft hum of life support systems. In the observer section, General Corvain slowly stood. His movement caught the attention of several delegates, who recognized his distinctive scarred appearance. Corvain had requested special permission to attend this session, though he hadn't spoken to anyone about his reasons. The war ended, Corvain said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, because the Void Seekers chose to end it. They withdrew not because we defeated them, but because they accomplished whatever they came to accomplish. The weight of his words settled over the assembly like a shroud. Many delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unwilling to acknowledge the truth that military leaders like Corvain knew all too well. We survived, Corvain continued, but we didn't win. Our technology failed us. Our strategies failed us. Our weapons were inadequate against an enemy that operated by rules we couldn't understand. Ambassador Chen stood again, sensing an opportunity. General Corvain, if I may ask, what do you think would be different if the Void Seekers returned today? Corvain's reptilian features showed the slightest hint of what might have been a smile. That, Ambassador, is exactly the right question to ask. The debate that followed would be remembered as one of the most intense in the Galactic Council's history. Representatives argued late into the cycle, rehashing old fears and older prejudices. The human delegation remained largely silent, letting their earlier words speak for themselves. As the session finally adjourned without a decision, General Corvain made his way down to the lower tiers. The human delegation was gathering their materials when he approached. General Rodriguez, Corvain said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting he had researched before attending.
I found your words interesting.
Rodriguez shook the offered hand, noting the strength in Corvain's grip and the weight of experience in his eyes.
Coming from you, General, that means a great deal. Your reputation precedes you. Does it? Corvain's scarred features showed genuine surprise. I wouldn't expect humans to know much about Alterian military history.
We make it our business to study those who faced the challenges we might face, Ambassador Chen interjected. Your defense of the Kepler station is required reading at our military academies.
Corvain's vertical pupils dilated slightly, an Alterian expression of astonishment.
The Battle of Kepler Station was considered one of the most hopeless last stands in galactic history. Corvain had held a critical supply depot against overwhelming Voidseeker forces for 6 days with less than 100 defenders. The fact that humans knew of it, much less studied it, was remarkable.
You study our failures? Corvain asked.
We study your victories, Rodriguez corrected.
The way you adapted your tactics when conventional strategies failed.
The way you turned disadvantages into advantages.
The way you held ground that everyone said couldn't be held.
We held that station because we had no choice, Corvain said quietly. The evacuation fleets needed time. If we had failed, millions would have died.
Exactly, Rodriguez said. You fought not because you could win, but because you had to fight. That's something we understand.
The three stood in comfortable silence for a moment, veterans recognizing something in each other that transcended species boundaries.
General, Chen said finally, would you be willing to continue this conversation in a more private setting? I think there are things we could discuss that might benefit both our peoples.
Corvain considered the request. Protocol demanded that he maintain official distance from species under consideration for alliance membership.
But something about these humans intrigued him.
They reminded him of Alterian soldiers, pragmatic, adaptable, and unafraid to acknowledge their limitations while working around them.
I'll consider it, he said finally. But, first, I have a question for you. The Council spoke of human determination and adaptability as if they were quaint attributes. In your honest assessment, how would your species respond to an existential threat? Something like the Void Seekers? Rodriguez and Chen exchanged glances.
The question went to the heart of their petition for alliance membership.
Honestly? Rodriguez said. We'd probably do exactly what we always do when faced with impossible odds. We'd improvise, adapt, and keep fighting until we found a way to win or die trying. And if conventional approaches failed?
Then, we'd try unconventional approaches, Chen added.
We'd experiment, take risks, break rules if necessary. We've never been particularly good at accepting that something can't be done.
Corvain's scarred features showed what was definitely a smile this time.
Interesting. Very interesting indeed.
As the general walked away, Ambassador Chen turned to Rodriguez.
Think we made an impression?
Hard to say, Rodriguez replied, watching Corvain's retreating figure.
But, I get the feeling this conversation isn't over.
Neither of them noticed the small recording device that had captured their entire exchange, or the hooded figure in the observer section who quietly slipped away as the chamber emptied. In the shadows between star systems, something stirred. Ancient sensors detected the energy signatures of galactic civilization, noting the same patterns they had observed 5 centuries ago.
The time of watching was nearly over.
Soon, it would be time to return and finish what they had started. But, this time, they would face not just the advanced civilizations they had fought before, but a strange new species that seemed to think determination could overcome technology, that adaptation could triumph over superior force.
The Void Seekers had never encountered anything quite like humanity before.
The coming conflict would test whether the galaxy's newest petitioners could back up their bold claims with action, or whether they would become just another footnote in the long history of civilizations that had fallen before the darkness. As the Galactic Council chamber fell silent and empty, the debate over human membership seemed almost trivial compared to the storm that was gathering in the void between galaxies. Soon, every species in the Alliance would learn whether humanity's unique approach to warfare could make a difference when the very survival of galactic civilization hung in the balance. The real test was coming, and humanity didn't even know it yet. 3 weeks after the heated council session, General Thrace Corvain stood in his private quarters aboard the Altarian flagship Eternal Vigilance, reviewing classified reports that made his scaled skin crawl with dread. The documents spread across his holographic display told a story that the Galactic Alliance wasn't ready to hear, but one that military intelligence could no longer ignore. Deep space monitoring stations had detected anomalous readings in the void regions beyond the galactic rim. Energy signatures that matched nothing in their databases, except for one classified set of readings from 500 years ago. The void seekers were stirring again. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Ambassador Sarah Chan's image materialized in the air before him, her expression serious but hopeful. General Corvain, thank you for accepting our invitation to meet. I hope you found our preliminary discussions productive. Corvain's vertical pupils contracted slightly as he studied the human diplomat. 3 weeks of discreet meetings had revealed depths to human strategy and adaptability that continued to surprise him. Their military doctrine was unlike anything in the Alliance databases, focused on flexibility, rapid adaptation, and making effective use of limited resources. Ambassador, your species continues to intrigue me. But I'm afraid I've requested this meeting to discuss matters far more urgent than membership petitions. Chen's expression grew serious. The anomalous readings from the outer rim? The fact that she knew about the classified monitoring data confirmed what Corvain had suspected about human intelligence capabilities. Despite their primitive technology, they had developed remarkably effective methods of gathering information. How much do you know? Corvain asked directly. Enough to be concerned, Chen replied. Our monitoring stations have detected similar patterns. We may not have your quantum sensors, but our gravitational wave detectors are more sensitive than most species realize. The signatures suggest massive ships moving in formation at the edge of detectable space. Corvain activated additional privacy shields around his quarters before responding. The Void Seekers are returning. Our intelligence estimates suggest a force at least 10 times larger than what we faced 5 centuries ago. The Alliance leadership refuses to acknowledge the threat, claiming the readings are equipment malfunctions or natural phenomena. Denial is a common response to existential threats, Chen observed. How long before they reach Alliance space? Based on their previous movement patterns and current trajectory, approximately 6 months. Perhaps less if they've improved their dark matter propulsion systems. The weight of that timeline hung between them. 6 months to prepare for an enemy that had previously swept aside the combined might of galactic civilization with terrifying ease. General, Chen said carefully, what would it take to convince the Alliance to begin preparations? Proof that they can't ignore or dismiss. Unfortunately, by the time we have such proof, it may be too late to mount an effective defense. Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking. What if we could provide that proof now? Corvain's scarred features showed interest. Explain. Human space contains several deep space monitoring installations that operate on different principles than Alliance sensors. We've been tracking the anomalous signatures for 2 weeks longer than your detection grid. We have detailed recordings, analysis, and projections that confirm your worst fears. Why haven't you shared this information with the Council? Chen's smile was grim. Because they would dismiss it as easily as they dismissed our membership petition. Primitive human technology couldn't possibly detect threats that advanced Alliance sensors missed. The irony wasn't lost on Corvain. The very qualities that made the Alliance dismiss humanity, their different approach to technology and their outsider perspective, might be exactly what was needed to address the coming crisis. What are you proposing? Corvain asked. A joint military exercise. Ostensibly to evaluate human combat capabilities as part of our membership review. In reality, an opportunity to share intelligence and begin coordinating defense preparations without triggering Alliance political resistance. Corvain considered the proposal. The Alliance Council had indeed requested a practical demonstration of human military capabilities before making their final decision on membership. Such an exercise would be perfectly legitimate and would provide cover for the kind of serious strategic planning that the situation demanded. The exercise would need to involve multiple Alliance fleets to be credible, Corvain said. And it would require testing unconventional scenarios. Scenarios that might mirror the tactics used by the Void Seekers? Chen asked. Precisely. The plan they developed over the next several hours was ambitious and risky. The joint exercise would bring together fleet elements from 6 major alliance powers, ostensibly to test human adaptability and combat effectiveness. In reality, it would serve as a training ground for the tactics and strategies that might be needed when the Void Seekers arrived. 2 days later, General Marcus Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the human heavy cruiser Indomitable, watching Alliance warships take their positions in the designated exercise area. The assembled fleet was impressive crystalline Nexari vessels that could reshape their hulls in real time, sleek Zephyrian ships bristling with energy weapons, and the massive Alterian dreadnoughts that had held the line during the last Void Seeker incursion. "Impressive sight," commented Commander Lisa Park, the Indomitable's captain. "Makes our ships look like antiques." Rodriguez nodded, studying the holographic display that showed the relative positions of all vessels. The human contribution to the exercise consisted of 12 ships, their entire deep space fleet. Each vessel was smaller and more lightly armed than their Alliance counterparts, built with different design philosophies and powered by less advanced technology. "Remember," Rodriguez said to the bridge crew, "we're not here to out-tech them. We're here to show them a different way of thinking." The first phase of the exercise was straightforward, a conventional fleet engagement against simulated enemy forces. The Alliance ships performed exactly as expected, using superior speed and firepower to overwhelm their targets. Their energy shields absorbed incoming fire while their quantum weapons disabled enemy vessels with surgical precision. The human ships, by contrast, struggled to keep pace. Their projectile weapons seemed primitive compared to energy beams that could slice through hull plating like paper. Their physical armor was no match for weapons that bypassed matter entirely. Aboard the Alterian flagship, General Corvain watched the engagement with studied interest. To most observers, the humans were performing poorly, confirming every stereotype about primitive human technology. But Corvain was looking for different things: patterns of movement, tactical adaptations, responses to changing conditions. He found them. While Alliance ships maintained perfect formations and executed textbook maneuvers, the human vessels moved with fluid unpredictability. They clustered together for mutual support, then scattered when threatened. They used debris fields for cover and turned disabled enemy ships into impromptu obstacles. When their weapons couldn't penetrate shields, they found ways to bypass them entirely. "Interesting," Corvain murmured, making notes that would never appear in the official exercise reports. The second phase introduced complications designed to test adaptive thinking. Simulated enemy forces used unusual tactics, sacrificing individual ships to achieve strategic objectives, employing kamikaze attacks against key targets, and fighting with apparent disregard for conventional military logic. The Alliance fleets struggled with these scenarios. Their tactical computers had been programmed for rational opponents who followed established principles of warfare. When faced with enemies who ignored those principles, the advanced AI systems that controlled Alliance fleet movements became confused and ineffective. The human response was different. Instead of relying on programmed responses, they adapted in real time. When enemy ships conducted suicide runs, human vessels moved to intercept and deflect rather than simply trying to destroy them. When conventional formations proved ineffective, they improvised new approaches on the spot. Commander Park demonstrated this adaptability when a group of simulated raiders targeted the exercise command ship. While Alliance vessels moved to engage using standard intercept courses, Park ordered her squadron to accelerate directly toward the attacking force, then execute a series of random course changes that made targeting impossible. "What are they doing?" demanded Captain Vex of the Zephyrian destroyer Quantum Strike, watching the human ships weave through space in apparent chaos. "They're making themselves impossible to predict," Corvain replied over the command frequency. "Watch what happens next." The human ships suddenly converged on a single point, concentrating their firepower on one raider while using their own vessels as mobile shields to protect the command ship. It was dangerous, unconventional, and completely effective. But the real test came during the third phase of the exercise, when the parameters were secretly modified to simulate conditions encountered during Void Seeker attacks. Simulated enemy forces now employed energy absorption techniques that made conventional weapons ineffective. They used dark matter manipulation to create zones where normal physics broke down. They coordinated their attacks with hive mind precision that made individual tactics irrelevant. The Alliance fleets found themselves facing their worst nightmares in simulation. Energy weapons that had served them for millennia suddenly became useless. Ships that had been invincible behind their shields found themselves helpless against attacks that bypassed every known defense. Within minutes, the exercise devolved into chaos. Alliance commanders called for halt orders as their sophisticated tactical systems crashed under the weight of scenarios they weren't designed to handle. Only the human ships continued fighting.
How are they still engaging? Captain Vex demanded, watching the display with disbelief.
Their weapons should be just as ineffective as ours. Rodriguez smiled grimly as he watched his ships adapt yet again to impossible circumstances.
Switch to kinetic bombardment, he ordered over the human command frequency. If energy weapons don't work, throw rocks.
The human ships began using their mass drivers, weapons originally designed for mining and construction, to launch dense metal slugs at high velocity. The projectiles couldn't be absorbed like energy, couldn't be deflected by conventional shields, and followed ballistic paths that were nearly impossible to predict.
But, more importantly, they began using the environment itself as a weapon.
When their projectiles proved insufficient to destroy heavily armored targets, they aimed for asteroids and space debris, turning the surrounding area into a storm of high-velocity fragments. "They're using everything as ammunition," Corvain observed with growing admiration. "Every piece of debris, every disabled ship, every environmental hazard, it's all potential weaponry to them." The human tactical approach became even more apparent when they began coordinating their attacks in ways that no Alliance database contained.
Instead of trying to match the simulated enemy's hive-mind coordination, they embraced chaos and unpredictability.
Each ship acted independently while maintaining loose coordination with the others, creating a web of mutual support that could adapt instantly to changing conditions. When one human vessel was damaged and losing power, the others didn't abandon it according to standard doctrine.
Instead, they incorporated the damaged ship into their tactics, using it as a mobile fortress while the crew conducted emergency repairs.
When repairs proved impossible, they stripped the ship of useful equipment and turned it into a guided missile aimed at the largest enemy target. The exercise officially ended when Alliance fleet commanders called for a comprehensive review of the simulation parameters, claiming that the scenarios were unrealistic and designed to favor primitive human tactics. But, in the privacy of secure communications, a different conversation was taking place. "General Corvain," Rodriguez's voice came through encrypted channels, "I believe your intelligence assessment is correct. The simulated tactics we face today match the historical accounts of Void Seeker behavior exactly." "More than match them," Corvain replied grimly.
The simulation parameters were based on updated projections of their capabilities. If anything, we made the exercise too easy. Ambassador Chen joined the conversation from her diplomatic vessel.
"The Alliance commanders are already discussing modifications to their tactical databases based on what they observed today. They're beginning to understand that conventional approaches won't work against this kind of enemy." "Beginning to understand, perhaps," Rodriguez said.
"But understanding and accepting are different things. How do we convince them to actually change their approach?" The answer came from an unexpected source.
Captain Vex of the Quantum Strike requested permission to join the secure channel, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration.
"General Corvain, I've been reviewing the exercise recordings. The humans weren't just adapting to the scenarios, they were predicting them. They knew what was coming before it happened." The channel fell silent for a moment before Chen responded. "Captain, are you asking if we've encountered this enemy before? Have you?" Rodriguez exchanged glances with his bridge crew before answering. "Not directly.
But we've studied every available record of the previous incursion. We've analyzed the tactics, the technologies, the patterns of behavior.
We've wargamed these scenarios thousands of times." "Why?" Corvain asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Because it's what we do," Rodriguez replied simply. "When we identify a potential threat, we study it until we understand it. Then, we figure out how to fight it." Captain Vex made a sound that might have been laughter. "You've been preparing for a war that ended before your species achieved spaceflight." "We've been preparing for the war that's coming," Rodriguez corrected. "Whether we're part of the Alliance or not, humanity is in this galaxy. If the Void Seekers return, we'll have to face them eventually. We'd rather be ready." The implications of that statement resonated through the comm channel. Here was a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel, dedicating resources to preparing for threats that might not materialize for centuries. It spoke to a kind of strategic thinking that was rare even among advanced civilizations. "There's something else," Chen added quietly. "Our analysis suggests that the previous Void Seeker withdrawal wasn't a defeat or a strategic retreat. It was a scouting mission.
They were testing alliance capabilities, learning weaknesses, developing countermeasures.
You're saying they've been preparing too, Corvain said. For 500 years. And, when they return, they'll be ready for everything that worked against them before.
The weight of that realization settled over the assembled commanders like a physical presence. The Void Seekers had withdrawn not because they were beaten, but because they had learned what they needed to learn. They would return with solutions to every tactic that had been used against them, countermeasures for every weapon that had proved effective.
Except for tactics and weapons that hadn't existed during the previous conflict.
Approaches so different from established doctrine that no previous encounter could have prepared them for it.
Captain Vax, Corvain said finally, what's your honest assessment of human combat effectiveness? The Zephyrian officer was quiet for a long moment before responding. Their technology is primitive.
Their ships are slow and underarmored. Their weapons are crude by our standards.
Another pause. But they fight like nothing I've ever seen.
They turn disadvantages into advantages.
They adapt faster than our computers can track. And they never, ever give up. Would you be willing to share that assessment with your superiors? Chen asked.
I'll do more than that, Vex replied.
I'm formally requesting permission to observe human military doctrine firsthand.
If we're going to face the kind of enemy you've been preparing for, we need to learn how to fight the way you fight. Similar requests began flooding in from other Alliance commanders over the following days. The exercise had done more than demonstrate human capabilities, it had shown Alliance forces their own limitations and offered a glimpse of alternative approaches that might prove crucial in the coming conflict. But, even as plans began forming for expanded cooperation and training, deep space monitors continued their vigilant watch on the void between galaxies. The anomalous readings were growing stronger each day, and the timeline for arrival was slowly but steadily shrinking. The Void Seekers were coming, and this time they would find the galaxy defended not just by advanced technology and superior firepower, but by species that had learned to think differently, fight differently, and adapt in ways that no simulation could predict. The question that remained was whether these new approaches would be enough, or whether the galaxy was about to learn that some enemies were beyond any defense, no matter how innovative or determined. 4 months after the joint military exercise, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened under circumstances that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. The Great Chamber, normally filled with the measured debates of diplomatic protocol, now buzzed with barely contained panic. Admiral Zentar of the Hegemony Deep Space Command stood at the central podium, her usually pristine uniform showing signs of the sleepless days she'd spent analyzing the mounting evidence. Around her, holographic displays showed sensor readings that painted a picture of approaching doom. The outer monitoring stations have confirmed our worst fears, she announced, her multitonal voice carrying through translation devices to every delegate present. The Void Seekers have returned in force. Current projections show an armada of over 10,000 vessels approaching from multiple vectors. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The previous Void Seeker incursion had involved fewer than 1,000 ships, yet had nearly broken the galaxy's defenses. Representative Thix of the Klaxon Collective's mandibles clicked rapidly in what his species considered extreme agitation.
10,000? How is that possible? Our intelligence suggested their numbers were much smaller during the last conflict.
Our intelligence was wrong, Admiral Zentar replied grimly. It appears the force that attacked us 5 centuries ago was merely an advance guard. The main armada remained in dark space, observing our responses and capabilities. In the human delegation section, Ambassador Chen sat with General Rodriguez and a newcomer to the council chambers, Admiral Janet Torres, recently appointed as humanity's military liaison to the Alliance. Torres had arrived 3 days ago aboard the newest human vessel, the carrier Defiance, which now maintained position in the outer system alongside ships from 6 different Alliance worlds. How long do we have? Asked Senator Vorth of the Nexari Coalition, her crystalline form pulsing with anxious energy. Based on their current approach vectors and estimated velocity, the first wave will reach Alliance perimeter systems in approximately 6 weeks, Admiral Zentar responded. The chamber erupted in panicked discussions. 6 weeks was barely enough time to mobilize existing fleets, let alone develop new strategies or coordinate between different military commands. General Corvain rose from his position in the military observer section.
Admiral, what's the current state of Alliance fleet readiness?
Combined fleet strength stands at approximately 8,000 vessels distributed across 47 defensive positions.
However, our analysis indicates that conventional tactics will be insufficient against the Void Seeker force.
They've had 5 centuries to develop countermeasures for every strategy we employed during the previous conflict.
Ambassador Keth of the Zephyrian Empire stood abruptly, his forearms gesticulating in obvious agitation. This is precisely why we maintained that expansion of Alliance membership was premature.
We should have focused our resources on strengthening existing defenses rather than accommodating primitive species. The comment was clearly directed at the human delegation, but Admiral Torres surprised many by standing to respond with calm professionalism. Ambassador Keth raises an important point about resource allocation, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding in crisis situations. However, I'd like to share some analysis that might alter the Council's perspective on this crisis. She activated a personal holographic projector, filling the space above the human delegation with detailed tactical displays. Our deep space monitoring network has been tracking the Voidseeker approach for several months. We've identified patterns in their formation and movement that suggest specific tactical intentions. The display showed the approaching armada from multiple angles, highlighting formation structures and approach vectors that Alliance sensors had detected but not fully analyzed.
The Voidseekers aren't simply advancing in overwhelming force, Torres continued.
They're executing a sophisticated strategic maneuver designed to exploit specific weaknesses in Alliance defensive doctrine. General Corvain leaned forward with interest.
Explain.
Alliance defensive strategy relies on centralized command structures and coordinated fleet movements. Your ships are designed to fight in formation, with overlapping fields of fire and mutual support systems.
It's an effective doctrine against conventional enemies.
Torres manipulated the display to show Alliance defensive positions relative to the approaching threat. However, the Voidseeker approach pattern is designed to force Alliance fleets into exactly the kind of coordinated response that proved ineffective during the previous conflict.
They're herding your forces into positions where conventional tactics will be most vulnerable. Ambassador Keth's expression showed skepticism. And, I suppose your primitive human analysis has identified solutions that centuries of Alliance military science have missed?
Not solutions, Torres replied calmly. Alternatives. Different approaches that might prove effective precisely because they don't follow established patterns. She gestured, and the display changed to show recordings from the recent joint military exercise. During our training exercises, we observed that conventional Alliance tactics became less effective when faced with unconventional enemy behavior. However, adaptive tactics that embraced unpredictability and flexibility proved remarkably successful. The accuracy and detail of the human analysis drew murmurs of surprise from throughout the chamber.
How do you possess such detailed historical data? Senator Vorth asked, her prismatic form flickering with curiosity. Admiral Torres smiled slightly. We asked for it.
When humanity began preparing for potential membership in the Alliance, we requested access to historical military records to better understand the threats we might face. Most council members were happy to share information they considered irrelevant to a primitive species. The implications of that statement resonated through the chamber. The humans had been studying Alliance military history while the Alliance barely acknowledged their existence. Our analysis indicates that the Voidseekers' greatest advantage lies in their ability to predict and counter Alliance responses, Torres continued. They've observed your tactics, studied your technologies, and developed specific countermeasures.
They're prepared for everything you used against them before. And, what do you propose we do about it?
General Corvain asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer.
Fight differently. Use tactics they haven't seen before.
Employ strategies that don't exist in their tactical databases.
Force them to adapt instead of simply executing prepared countermeasures. The chamber fell silent as delegates considered the implications.
The idea of abandoning proven military doctrine in favor of untested human theories seemed almost as dangerous as facing the Voidseekers with conventional tactics.
Ambassador Chen rose to support her military colleague. The Council has a decision to make.
You can continue using the same approaches that failed 5 centuries ago, hoping that superior numbers will somehow produce different results. Or you can consider the possibility that a fresh perspective might offer advantages that established doctrine cannot.
Pretty words, Keth replied coldly, but words won't stop dark matter weapons or quantum disruptors. What concrete advantages can your species offer beyond theoretical alternatives to proven tactics? Admiral Torres nodded to General Rodriguez, who activated another holographic display.
This one showed technical specifications for human military equipment, weapons, ships, and support systems that had been dismissed as primitive by Alliance observers.
Our weapons may be less sophisticated than yours, Rodriguez said, but they operate on different principles. Dark matter manipulation can't deflect kinetic projectiles. Quantum disruptors can't absorb chemical explosives. Energy absorption fields can't stop physical impacts. More importantly, Torres added, our ships are designed around different tactical philosophies. Alliance vessels are optimized for formation fighting and coordinated fleet actions. Human ships are designed for independent operation and adaptive tactics. She highlighted specific design elements on the display. Our vessels carry extensive supplies and repair equipment, allowing them to operate independently for extended periods. They're built for rapid course changes and evasive maneuvering rather than maximum firepower. They can be quickly reconfigured for different mission roles. What you call primitive limitations, Rodriguez continued, we call operational flexibility. When your energy weapons fail, we fall back to projectiles. When shields become useless, we rely on armor and evasive tactics. When formation fighting becomes ineffective, we scatter and fight independently. The presentation was compelling, but many delegates remained skeptical. Centuries of technological advancement had created a mindset that equated sophistication with effectiveness. The debate was interrupted by Admiral Zentar, who received an urgent communication and went pale with shock. Council members, I've just received a priority alert from the outer monitoring stations. The Void Seeker Armada has accelerated beyond our projected timelines. Arrival estimate is now 3 weeks, not 6. Panic rippled through the chamber like a physical wave. 3 weeks was barely enough time to mobilize existing fleets, let alone implement new strategies or coordinate between different military commands. How is that possible? Senator Vorth demanded. Unknown. The acceleration appears to be the result of technology we haven't encountered before. They're moving faster than our models predicted they could achieve. In the sudden silence that followed, Admiral Torres spoke quietly but clearly. The acceleration confirms our analysis. They're not just returning with superior numbers, they're returning with superior technology. Conventional responses will be even less effective than we initially projected. General Corvain stood slowly, his scarred features grave with the weight of command decisions that could determine the fate of galactic civilization. Admiral Torres, are you formally proposing that Alliance forces adopt human tactical doctrine? I'm proposing that Alliance forces learn from human tactical doctrine, Torres corrected. We're not suggesting you abandon your capabilities, we're suggesting you supplement them with approaches the Void Seekers haven't seen before. And, how exactly would this integration work? Corvain pressed. Rodriguez and Torres exchanged glances before Rodriguez answered. Joint task forces. Mixed formations of Alliance and human vessels operating under adaptive command structures. Alliance ships provide heavy firepower and advanced defensive systems. Human ships provide tactical flexibility and unconventional approaches. Your ships are outnumbered 10-1 even within such formations, Representative Thix pointed out. Numbers aren't everything, Torres replied. One ship that can adapt and surprise the enemy might accomplish more than 10 ships following predictable patterns. The chamber erupted in heated discussion as delegates debated the unprecedented proposal. Some argued for maintaining traditional alliance doctrine, while others supported the desperate innovation that circumstances seemed to demand. The debate was cut short by another urgent communication to Admiral Zentar. This time, her expression showed not just alarm but genuine fear. Council members, she announced, I've received confirmation that Void Seeker scout forces have been detected in the Kepler sector. They're not just approaching, they're already here. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. The Kepler sector was only 2 weeks from the Alliance core worlds by conventional travel. If scout forces were already that close, the main armada couldn't be far behind. How many scouts? Corvain demanded. Approximately 50 vessels, moving in a dispersed pattern that makes precise tracking difficult. Admiral Torres was already manipulating her holographic display, overlaying the scout movements with Alliance defensive positions. They're conducting reconnaissance in force, she observed. Testing response times, analyzing defensive capabilities, and identifying priority targets. The same pattern they used during the previous conflict, Corvain confirmed grimly. Not exactly the same, Torres corrected,
highlighting specific movement patterns on her display. They're being more systematic this time, more thorough.
They're not just identifying defenses, they're mapping everything.
The realization sent a chill through the chamber. The Void Seekers weren't just preparing to attack, they were preparing to conquer. Council members, Ambassador Chen said into the stunned silence, humanity formally requests permission to deploy our forces alongside Alliance fleets in defense of galactic civilization. The request should have been routine military cooperation, but, under the circumstances, it carried deeper implications.
Humanity was volunteering to face an enemy that had devastated civilizations far more advanced than their own.
Your entire fleet consists of fewer than 24 vessels, Senator Vorth pointed out.
What difference could such a small force make against thousands of enemy ships?
Admiral Torres smiled grimly. Sometimes the smallest forces make the biggest difference. Sometimes all it takes is one unexpected tactic, one surprise that throws off the enemy's entire plan. She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. Besides, she continued, we're not just offering our ships.
We're offering our perspective.
Our willingness to try things that haven't been tried before.
Our refusal to accept that any enemy is unbeatable.
The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone had expected.
Traditional alliance doctrine clashed with desperate innovation, while the approaching threat made delay increasingly dangerous.
In the end, it was General Corvain who cast the deciding vote. The Alliance formally accepts human military cooperation in defense against the Void Seeker incursion. May we all survive to debate whether this decision was wise. As the council session ended and emergency defensive preparations began, Admiral Torres stood with her human colleagues, looking out at the assembled Alliance fleet through the chamber's great viewports.
Think we can actually pull this off? Rodriguez asked quietly. Ask me again in 3 weeks, Torres replied.
By then, we'll know if innovation can triumph over overwhelming force, or if some enemies really are too powerful to defeat. The countdown to invasion had begun, and, with it, the most desperate gamble in galactic history. Humanity would finally get its chance to prove that determination and adaptability could make a difference when everything seemed hopeless. The question was whether it would be enough, or whether the galaxy was about to learn that some threats were beyond any defense, no matter how creative or brave.
The first Void Seeker attack came without warning, striking the Alliance border station at Procyon with devastating efficiency.
Admiral Janet Torres watched the tactical displays aboard the human flagship Defiance as emergency signals flooded the communication networks. The station, a massive defensive platform that had guarded the sector for 3 centuries, vanished from sensors in less than 4 minutes.
Confirmed hostile contact, reported Commander Sarah Kim from the sensor station. Void Seeker formation, approximately 200 vessels, moving toward the Centauri defense grid. Torres stood in the center of the Defiance's Combat Information Center, surrounded by displays showing the disposition of the hastily assembled defensive fleet.
Human ships formed small squadrons integrated with larger Alliance formations, their crews trained in the unconventional tactics that were now their only hope.
Signal to all Alliance commanders, Torres ordered. Implementation of Protocol 7. Dispersed defensive pattern, no predetermined formation structures.
Protocol 7 was the designation for the adaptive tactics that had emerged from weeks of intensive joint training.
Instead of the massive fleet formations that Alliance doctrine preferred, mixed squadrons would operate independently, coordinating through rapid communication bursts while maintaining tactical flexibility.
General Corvain's voice came through the secure command channel from his flagship Eternal Vigilance.
Admiral Torres, Alliance sensors are detecting unusual energy signatures from the Void Seeker formation. They appear to be employing technology we haven't encountered before. Confirmed, Torres replied, studying her own sensor readings.
They're using some kind of reality distortion field that makes conventional targeting nearly impossible. Energy weapons are being deflected or absorbed before they can reach their targets.
The implications were devastating.
The Alliance's primary advantage lay in their advanced energy weapons and defensive systems. If those technologies were ineffective against new Void Seeker capabilities, conventional tactics would be worse than useless.
All human squadrons, Torres broadcast on the tactical frequency, switched to kinetic protocols immediately. No energy weapons until further notice. Across the defensive grid, human vessels began reconfiguring their weapon systems.
Mass drivers designed for asteroid mining became primary armament.
Chemical explosive warheads replaced sophisticated energy torpedoes. Primitive by Alliance standards, but operating on principles that reality distortion couldn't easily counter. The Void Seeker fleet approached the Centauri grid like a dark tide, their ships moving with the coordinated precision that had devastated Alliance forces 5 centuries ago. But, this time, they encountered something unexpected. Instead of the massive defensive formations they had trained to counter, scattered squadrons of mixed vessels challenged them from unpredictable directions. Human ships darted between larger Alliance vessels, using speed and maneuverability to avoid the concentrated firepower that had overwhelmed previous defenders. Captain Lisa Park, commanding the human cruiser Indomitable, demonstrated the new tactical approach when her squadron encountered a group of Void Seeker destroyers. Instead of engaging in a conventional firefight, she ordered her ships to accelerate directly toward the enemy formation. All ships, ramming speed, Park commanded, knowing that her order would have horrified Alliance commanders trained in preservation of expensive vessels. But, ramming wasn't the actual intention. As the human ships closed to point-blank range, they suddenly scattered in different directions, laying mines and kinetic charges that created a web of destruction around the confused Void Seeker vessels. The enemy ships, expecting either retreat or conventional combat, found themselves trapped in a rapidly expanding field of explosions. Effective hit on enemy formation, Park reported as 3 Void Seeker destroyers disappeared in brilliant flashes of disrupted dark matter. They weren't prepared for suicide tactics that weren't actually suicidal. Similar scenes played out across the battlespace as human crews implemented tactics that had no precedent in galactic warfare. When faced with Void Seeker energy absorption fields, they used kinetic weapons. When enemy ships employed hive-mind coordination, human vessels scattered and fought independently. When conventional formation fighting proved ineffective, they turned space itself into a weapon. Commander Marcus Webb, leading a mixed squadron of human and Alliance ships, perfected this approach when his force encountered a Void Seeker heavy cruiser protected by reality distortion fields that made it nearly invulnerable to conventional attack. Alliance vessels maintain maximum range and provide covering fire, Webb ordered. Human ships execute Pattern Delta. Pattern Delta was an improvised tactic that had emerged during training exercises. Human vessels would accelerate toward enemy ships while ejecting everything they could spare parts, empty supply containers, even personal belongings, creating a cloud of debris that followed ballistic trajectories the enemy couldn't predict or counter. The tactic turned the human ships into mobile asteroid fields, surrounding enemy vessels with thousands of unpredictable projectiles that overwhelmed point defense systems and created gaps in protective fields. When the debris cleared, Alliance energy weapons could find their targets. Direct hit on enemy heavy cruiser, Webb reported with satisfaction as the massive Void Seeker vessel broke apart under concentrated fire. Sometimes the best way to overcome sophisticated defenses is to bury them in simple problems. But, the real test of human tactical innovation came when Admiral Torres received reports of a massive Void Seeker formation approaching the core defensive grid. Over 1,000 enemy vessels moved in perfect coordination, their dark matter weapons already charging for the kind of devastating assault that had broken Alliance lines during the previous conflict. General Corvain, Torres transmitted to the Alliance commander, recommend implementation of Chaos Protocol. The Chaos Protocol was the most radical departure from Alliance doctrine, a complete abandonment of coordinated fleet action in favor of what human military theorists called organized chaos. Instead of fighting as a unified force, the defensive fleet would fragment into hundreds of individual units, each operating independently while maintaining loose coordination through rapid communication bursts. Admiral, Corvain replied, his voice tight with the stress of command, the Chaos Protocol violates every principle of fleet engagement. We'll be abandoning the mutual support that keeps our ships alive. General, conventional mutual support won't work against an enemy that can predict and counter coordinated responses. The only support that matters now is unpredictability. The decision went against centuries of Alliance military tradition, but the approaching enemy force left no room for conventional thinking. Corvain gave the order, and the defensive fleet scattered like seeds in a hurricane. What followed was unlike any space battle in galactic history. Instead of the massive formation engagements that Void Seeker tacticians had planned for, they faced hundreds of individual actions fought by small groups using tactics that followed no established patterns. Human engineering crews had prepared for this moment by modifying Alliance ships with human-designed systems that operated on different principles than standard technology. Kinetic weapons were installed alongside energy systems. Physical armor plating supplemented energy shields. Communication systems were rewired to operate on quantum-encrypted frequencies that enemy technology couldn't decode. The result was organized chaos that the Void Seekers couldn't comprehend or counter.
Every time they concentrated fire on one target, others struck from unexpected directions.
Every time they adapted to one tactic, human ingenuity produced another approach that operated on completely different principles.
Captain Jennifer Walsh, commanding the human destroyer Resilient, exemplified this adaptive approach when her ship found itself surrounded by 6 Void Seeker cruisers. Instead of trying to fight her way out, she ordered her crew to implement what they had dubbed the Porcupine Defense. The Resilient stopped moving entirely and began broadcasting a surrender signal while simultaneously ejecting every mine, torpedo, and kinetic projectile in its arsenal in a spherical pattern around the ship. To the Void Seekers, it appeared that the human vessel had given up and was dumping weapons as a sign of capitulation. When the enemy ships moved in to capture what they assumed was a defenseless vessel, they triggered a 3-dimensional minefield that Walsh's crew had armed with proximity sensors and motion detectors. The explosions that followed destroyed 4 of the 6 cruisers and severely damaged the others. "Sometimes the best defense is letting the enemy think they've won," Walsh reported as her crew rapidly reloaded their weapons and prepared for the next engagement. But the most crucial moment of the battle came when Void Seeker heavy assault units targeted the Alliance command ship carrying the sector leadership. These massive vessels, each the size of a small moon, possessed firepower that could devastate entire fleets and defenses that had never been breached by conventional weapons.
Admiral Torres made a decision that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances.
"All human vessels, converge on my position," she ordered.
"We're going to show these things what happens when humans get really annoyed."
The human fleet, all 23 vessels, abandoned their individual actions and formed up around the Defiance in a tight formation that conventional wisdom declared suicidal. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing enemies that had never been defeated in direct combat.
"Admiral," General Rodriguez's voice came through the comm system, "are you certain about this approach? We're concentrating our entire force against their strongest units."
"Sometimes you have to take the biggest risks to achieve the most important objectives," Torres replied. "Besides, we're not fighting them conventionally." What Torres had planned was the ultimate expression of human tactical thinking, a direct assault that used every advantage humanity had learned to create. The human ships accelerated toward the Void Seeker assault units not as individual vessels, but as components of a massive kinetic weapon. Each ship carried external pods filled with dense metal slugs, chemical explosives, and exotic matter that human scientists had been developing in secret. As they approached the enemy formation, they began ejecting these materials in precisely calculated patterns that turned the space around the Void Seeker heavy units into a maze of high-velocity projectiles and timed explosions. But the real surprise was what happened when the human ships reached point-blank range. Instead of engaging in traditional combat, they executed a maneuver that no sane tactical computer would have approved. They began dismantling themselves.
External armor plates were jettisoned as guided missiles. Fuel tanks were ejected as improvised bombs. Even non-essential crew compartments were separated from the main hulls and sent on collision courses with enemy targets.
The human ships literally tore themselves apart to create a storm of destruction that overwhelmed every defensive system the Void Seekers possessed. "This is insane," Captain Vex of the Zephyrian destroyer Quantum Strike transmitted as he watched human vessels sacrifice themselves piece by piece to achieve tactical objectives. "They're destroying their own ships to win the battle." "They're not destroying them," General Corvain replied with something that might have been admiration in his voice.
"They're using them. Everything, hull plating, fuel, waste heat, even electromagnetic emissions, is a weapon to them."
The Void Seeker heavy assault units, faced with an attack that operated by no rules they understood, began to falter for the first time in their species' history. Their sophisticated tactical systems, designed to counter every form of conventional warfare, couldn't process an enemy that turned self-destruction into a tactical advantage. When the chaos finally cleared, 3 of the 5 Void Seeker heavy units had been destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had been reduced to 7 operational vessels, but they had accomplished something unprecedented. They had defeated the Void Seekers' most powerful units using nothing but human ingenuity and a willingness to try things that no rational military doctrine would approve. The victory proved to be the turning point of the entire battle. Faced with tactics they couldn't predict or counter, the Void Seeker fleet began to withdraw for the first time in their recorded history. Their hive mind coordination, which had been their greatest strength, became a liability when forced to adapt to chaos they couldn't understand. As the enemy ships retreated toward the dark space between galaxies, Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the heavily damaged Defiance, watching Alliance and human vessels begin rescue and recovery operations.
Admiral, Commander Kim reported, were receiving communications from the Galactic Council. They're requesting a full tactical report and they want to discuss humanity's application for Alliance membership. Torres smiled as she looked out at the mixed fleet of Alliance and human vessels working together to clear the battlefield. Tell them we'll be happy to discuss membership. But, first, we need to prepare for the next attack. Ma'am? Kim looked confused. The Void Seekers are retreating. They're regrouping, Torres corrected. This was just their first probe with new tactics. They'll be back, and, when they return, they'll have adapted to everything we showed them today. The realization sent a chill through the bridge crew, but Torres wasn't discouraged. The Void Seekers might adapt to human tactics, but humans would adapt faster. It was what they did best. 3 days later, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address humanity's membership application. The debate was brief and unanimous. Ambassador Chen found herself standing before the assembled representatives as they formally welcomed humanity into the Alliance as full members with all rights and responsibilities. The motion carries without dissent, the Council President announced. Humanity is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Alliance, with special recognition for tactical innovation in defense of galactic civilization. But, the celebration was tempered by the knowledge that the war was far from over. Deep space monitors continue to track massive formations of Voidseeker vessels gathering in the darkness beyond the galactic rim. The enemy had been surprised once, but they were already adapting. General Corvain approached Ambassador Chen after the ceremony, his scarred features showing something that might have been optimism. Ambassador, your species has accomplished something remarkable. You've given us hope that this war can be won. We've given you proof that any enemy can be defeated if you're willing to think differently about how to fight them, Chen replied. The question now is whether we can stay ahead of their adaptations. With human tactical innovation and Alliance technological capabilities, I believe we can, Corvain said firmly. Your people have shown us that determination and ingenuity can overcome any advantage. As the Alliance began preparing for the next phase of the conflict, human tactical doctrine was integrated into military academies across the galaxy. Officers who had spent centuries perfecting formation fighting learned to embrace chaos and unpredictability. Crews trained in precise coordination practiced independent action and adaptive response. The Void Seekers would return, that was certain. But, when they did, they would face not just the advanced technology that had challenged them before, but human determination, human adaptability, and human refusal to accept that any enemy was unbeatable. In the end, humanity had been dismissed by the galaxy because they were different. Now, that same difference had become the galaxy's greatest weapon against an enemy that had never faced anything quite like human ingenuity applied to the art of war. The real test was still to come, but, for the first time in galactic history, civilized species faced the darkness between stars with genuine hope for victory. Sometimes, all it takes to change everything is someone willing to try something that has never been tried before. And, humanity, it turned out, excelled at trying the impossible.